Welcome to The Way to a Wonderful Life. Rev Bates on the radio, live from Palm Springs, California.
Good morning, and thank you for joining me today for The Way to a Wonderful Life. I am Reverend Dr. Henry Lee Bates, and this morning we're going to be thinking about immigration reform in a Jesus kind of way. Right now in our current political climate regarding immigration reform, there's so many things that are missing, and unfortunately it's because so many people that are involved in immigration reform are so far removed from the actual people who are affected by immigration reform. And so many times we lose sight of the fact that when we look at the Holy Scriptures, it tells us so many things that we can learn from, that so many of those truths that are found in the Holy Bible and the Torah and all the great spiritual literature is still just as relevant as it was in the days in which those words were taken down and recorded for future generations. When we look at the book of Leviticus 19:33 through 34, we can read, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And so when we think about those words, we understand that the boundaries and nationalities that we on a human level think are so important to God, they are nothingness. They are the nothingness. We read in the book of Isaiah, I am the Lord, besides me there is no thing, besides me there is nothingness. And so we know that the care and the love of God is for every living thing, for everyone, that we're all here to express that livingness, that givingness, and that forgivingness of God. And so when we label people as illegal, or we label them as legal, or we label them as anything, we're going outside of the Spirit of God, outside of the Spirit of God's unconditional love for all of life, and we're taking into our minds something that not only negates the life of those that we think about, but negates our own life. Because as Jesus said, we are to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and equally important, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. And what this is telling us is we must keep our mind open and receptive to God's movement of love in our life, of the Spirit of God in our life, of the intelligence of God in our life, and of the power of God in our life. So many times people think that, people do things to us, or people are doing things that are against us, but if we trust in God and we trust in the unconditional love of God, and we realize that the presence of God is available to everyone right where we are, then we know that that love of God is always working everything to the good, but it's working everything to the good for everyone. And so we take that into our mind when we think about immigration reform. So many times we see so much in the news from people who have nothing but the ugliest thoughts about other people, the ugliest thoughts about those who immigrate to this country. And it compels me to want to think about it in a spiritual way. Because the only defense we ever have against anything of a negative nature is to pull into our mind, draw into our mind, a greater reasoning, a greater understanding, and most importantly, that greater love of God, that greater intelligence, wisdom of God, that we can look out into our world and we can see it in the way that God sees things. And when Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek," he didn't say, "Let someone slap your other cheek." He was saying, look at things in a different way. Look at it in a different way. Look at it in a spiritual way. And if we're going to judge, he says, we're to judge with right judgment. We're to judge with the idea that God is creating all things for our good, that all the movement of life is for the good, and that all those things that negate life, all those things that diminish life, they all dissolve in their own right and perfect time. When we look at the intelligence of dealing with immigration reform, we have to realize that it's taken this country many years to really get itself into a position to where we really understand this issue intelligently. President Reagan did an amnesty, and during that time, people didn't quite understand what his amnesty meant. But it meant that he felt that love in his heart for those who were being oppressed, and his love in his heart for those who were living in the shadows of life here in the United States. And he understood that that's no way to treat anyone. Never since the days of slavery have we had the legal authorities separate families for absolutely no reason other than the law allows it. The law would allow it. When we look back at the days of slavery in this country, we understood that black people were possessions. They were treated just as livestock was treated, that they could sell them, they could do whatever they wanted to do with them. They ripped them away from their children and their spouses. That this was a horrible time in this country for people of color. And so we look at what's happening with illegal immigration, and we see that we have people that have lived in this country for 15, 20 years who have worked hard and who are raising their families and looking for a better life. And so many people think, oh, well, this is no different than moving from state to state. Well, absolutely. There's no comparison. That's comparing apples to oranges. People in Mexico work for $10 a day or $2 a day or $3 a day. Even the Nissan factory in Mexico only pays its people $15 a day. And so we look at why people immigrate. We understand that any of us would want the best future for our children. Any of us would want that better life, that greater life. And Jesus said, I have come to tell you that you may have life and you may have it more abundantly. And that's the truth for everyone. Everyone has that desire for the more wonderful life. And President Obama has done an executive order that children brought to this country at a young age have a deferment. That means they get a deferment for 3 years from being taken out of this country, from deportation, from being deported. Now, if they commit a criminal act, a felony, then of course they would be deported. And parents of children born in this country were also offered the freedom from being deported. Their children were born in this country. They were American children born on American soil. Once again, not since slavery have we used the laws of our country to separate families. Not since slavery. There's instances where people are pulled apart from their families and their family has no means of support. That children come home from school and their parents are gone for absolutely no reason other than maybe they were driving without a driver's license in a state where they aren't even allowed to have a driver's license. There are illegal immigrants that are paying into the Social Security Fund and paying taxes that they will never receive the benefits for, and doing work that they will never be compensated for because people oppress them and intimidate them, that if they fight the injustice, that they will lose their ability to stay in this country. So many things that happen with our current immigration policies that just do nothing but instill fear in the lives of people that are just here to have a better life, to gain something greater for their children. There are people that are pulled away from their children and their children have no other means of support. And then the same people who are in favor of them being deported away from their children cry and whine about their children getting social services, welfare, or food stamps. Well, how are they to live? We live in a country based on freedom. We live in a country of immigrants. Unless you're a Native American, and unless your Native American heritage is based in this country, then you're an immigrant. You're an immigrant. We're all children of immigrants. And so many people who have come to this country as immigrants were first abused. Irish people were abused when they first came to this country. Germans felt that abuse. Germans didn't even speak the English language until the war with the Nazis, and they learned to change their language so that they would be more assimilated into the culture of America and disassociated with Germany. so many times we have so little patience with those who come to this country and learn our language and learn our culture and learn the ways of American life. But we must know that every generation that's come to this country, from another culture, has had its time that it needed to realize and assimilate into this culture and loose those old ideas, those old cultures, those old ways behind. In the book of Exodus, we can read 22:21, "You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." And in this passage in the Bible that's talking about Israel, where in the Bible, Israel, the Israelites stand for all of us. It stands for the human race. It symbolizes the human race. In Deuteronomy 27:19, we read, "Cursed be anyone who perverts the justice due to the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow," and all the people shall say, "Amen." In Zechariah 7:9-10, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against another in your heart." Now, all these passages are coming from the Old Testament. This is before the mastermind Jesus began his ministry. The book of Jeremiah 7:5-7, "For if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you do not oppress the sojourner," that is the immigrant, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, "and if you do not go after other gods to your own harm, then I will let you dwell in this place in the land that I gave of old to your fathers forever." In other words, we're to let people assimilate into our culture, into our life. All these things are coming to us for us to realize that God's love is unconditional, and that if we are to really focus in our mind on the true justice of life, then we must recognize that that unconditional love of God must express through each and every one of us, and that we must loose within our mind all the judgments that separate us from each other. In spirit, we are all brothers and sisters. In the spirit, we are all of the same God. In the spirit, we are all seeking the greater life, the more wonderful life. We're seeking a more prosperous life, a healthier life. Not only for ourselves, but for those we love, for our children, for our families, for those in our communities. We're all seeking that. That's a healthy mind that seeks to see each other prospered and healthy and successful. It is a diseased mind that sees someone as less than and inferior. God did not create inferior people or inferior things. Only the mind of man can find the word inferior in its consciousness. Only the mind of mankind can find the word hate in its consciousness that is not part of God. In Leviticus 25:35, we read, "If your brother becomes poor and you cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you." In other words, we're to treat everyone the way we desire God to support us, to love us, to supply us. And when Jesus tells us in the key to life, "Our Father which art in heaven," that heaven means our mind. That's why Jesus said the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and he said it multiple times throughout his teaching. It's what we think of life, what we think of each other, how we treat each other. It's the love that we expressed through us from God. That's the most important thing in our life. It's the thing that keeps us healthy. It's the thing that increases our knowledge. It's the thing that increases our success and our prosperity. It's the thing that sustains and supports loving companionship. In Proverbs 31:8-9, we read, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So as we take those words into our mind, and then we realize that all of us have a duty to God, to love one another. Just as Jesus said, to love one another, to take into our mind that greater thing still. Let's look at these words from Matthew 13 through 15. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fill what the Lord has spoken by the prophet, Out of Egypt I called my son. In other words, this passage is telling us that Jesus' mother and father took him, immigrated to Egypt. They were immigrants to Egypt. And the way in which we treat other immigrants is the way we're going to be treating our Lord. Because when we think about the Spirit of God within everyone, we must realize that we have an admonition from God to treat everyone as our brother. Treat everyone as our brother or our sister. In Isaiah 16:3-4, we read, Give counsel, grant justice, make your shade like night at the height of noon. Shelter the outcast. Do not reveal the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you. Be a shelter to them from the destroyer when the oppressor is no more and destruction has ceased, and he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land. In other words, we're to protect those who have no protection from anyone else. We're to protect those who don't have any protection from unjust laws or laws that defy the laws of God, the law of God's unconditional love, as it must be a part of everything that we do, every action that we take in life. You know, I know of an instance where someone was stopped for driving without a license. And this is someone that had no criminal record whatsoever. But this person who was driving without a license was working. But a policeman stopped him. And the policeman called Border Security. And even though the policy of Homeland Security was that no one without a criminal record was to be deported, he was deported without even being given the opportunity to make a telephone call to someone. So in other words, the policeman broke the law, the border patrolman broke the law, but they deported this man for breaking a law. So they were judge and jury, and even though they themselves were breaking the law, they saw nothing in their mind, in their wisdom or reason, that his punishment shouldn't be so much more gross than theirs. And yet he had 2 children, and his wife was pregnant with another child on the way. So who was to take care of those children? Who was to comfort those children when their father didn't come home? And what kind of punishment did this border patrolman and this policeman mete out to this young man who was working to support his family, and all his only crime was driving without a license in a state that would not give him a license? But yet they broke the law, but they weren't deported. As a matter of fact, they weren't even reprimanded for breaking the law, but they know they did. So somewhere in their consciousness, that injustice is going to reflect itself in their lives. They don't, nobody gets away from anything. We live in a world of cause and effect, or as the Mastermind Jesus tells us, a world of sowing and reaping. So whatever it is that we sow in our mind, whatever it is that we think about ourselves or think about another, we shall see a reflection of that thought, that pattern of thinking in our life experience, no matter what it is. That's why Jesus said, We must love one another. We must love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and equally important, love our neighbor, and our neighbor being anyone that we come into contact with as ourselves. In Deuteronomy 23:16, we read, He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns. Wherever it suits him, you shall not wrong him. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns. Wherever it suits him, you shall not wrong him. Because in this revelation of truth, we realize that it's God always compelling us, it's God always guiding us, it's God always directing us to go here or to go there, or to do this or to do that, to realize our greater good, to realize the good that God has in store for us. In Isaiah 55:5, we read, Behold, you shall call a nation that you do not know, and a nation that did not know you shall run to you, because of the Lord your God and of the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. And in Isaiah 32:18, we read, My people will abide in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings, and in quiet resting places. In other words, God is telling us that we are under God's embrace, we are under God's protection, under God's security, no matter where we may be. And we must recognize that for everyone. That God, what put us here today? God did. What gave us the life today? To breathe, to open our mind, to open our eyes, to hear these words. It's God. God intelligence, God power, God spirit within us that makes all these things possible. Without God, there is no life. Just like without the ocean, there is no wave. But the wave has all the attributes of the ocean, just as we have all the attributes of God. That's why the scriptures tell us we are created in the image and the likeness of God. That image is spirit, it's life, it's intelligence, it's power. That likeness is love, and harmony, and beauty, and spirit, and happiness, and joy, and beauty, and peace. That's the likeness of God. So we're to share that, give our love freely, give our joy freely, share that in the abundance that God has given us, share in the life that God has given us with all people who come into our experience. And what does Jesus have to say about all this? In Matthew 25:35, we can read, For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And his disciples said, What do you mean? When were you hungry? When were you thirsty? When were you any of these things? He said, when you see this in anyone, when you did this for anyone, you did it for me. You did it for that spirit within me, which is connected with that greater spirit that we call God. Whatever it is that you do, we're always doing it to God, because God is all in all. God is everything. God is every life that we encounter, every living thing that we encounter. And in Matthew 5:46-47, Jesus tells us, For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the pagans do the same? Do not even the pagans and the ungodly do the same? And in Mark 12:30-31, we read, For you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this. He tells us, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So in those two commandments, Jesus is telling us that love is the rule that we are to live our life by. That as we let love rule through our mind, rule through our heart, rule through our soul, as we let everything that we do, everything that we seek to have, everything that we seek to be, be guided by the love of God, then we shall find ourselves realizing that greater thing still, that greater life of joy and happiness and peace. In Matthew 25:40, and the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. And in 1 John 4:20 we read, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Whom he has not seen. The love in the spiritual sense that the mastermind Jesus spoke of is to want for others what we desire for ourselves and nothing less. Nothing less. To want for others what we desire for ourselves and nothing else. So it's up to us to loose all the things from our mind that separate us from God, because all the things that separate us from each other, all the labels of the world that separate us from each other, are separating us from God. If we wonder why we aren't feeling the same health that we were feeling when we were younger, if we're feeling that somehow that life is not the great joy that we think it should be, if we're finding that somehow we're not finding the success that we should find, then we must loose those things from our mind that do not behold the love of God in all of life. And when we do, then we shall be on our path, on our way to a wonderful life. And so it is.